Hey, we're headed back up into the 90s again this weekend, and while some of us can avoid working in dangerously hot temperatures outdoors, some workers like firefighters, construction workers, mail deliverers, all are exposed to this heat and are at risk of heat-related illnesses and perhaps even death. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, more than nearly 40 work-related deaths occurred in 2015 due to overexposure to heat. And this morning, I'm joined by Access Point Safety and Risk Manager Scott Vandenbosch. Thank you so much for joining us. And he's here to talk about how employers and employees can help beat the heat. So what are some of the things that extreme heat can do to people? What are some of the symptoms they should be on the lookout for?
Well, you know, there are obviously heat bring on, sweats, dizziness, malaise, all kinds of things like that. But, you know, generally speaking, we start out with like heat cramps. We work our way up to heat exhaustion, and then we can work our way up to heat stroke, which is obviously could be deadly.
But sweating is good, though.
Yeah, sweating is good. But obviously, if you get into like this weekend, you were talking about, you get up in the 90s. Right. When you get into heat index where the humidity is so high, your body can't sweat anymore. So therefore, what do you do then? So what we're trying to do is that we want to educate folks on what you can do when the heat index is very high and they have to work out in those fields. Like you see people working out in the streets a lot.
Without a doubt.
Exactly. So what we try to do is what OSHA recommends, or what we try to recommend to the folks, is to a couple things we can do. We can obviously wear the appropriate clothing, which would be, some light clothing, something that obviously the heat isn't going to be absorbed like the black shirt we have here. You don't want to be wearing something like this.
So light clothing, you're talking about color and weight?
Yes, and something that has a wicking, ability to it. That's the best thing. Now, you've heard before in the past that cotton and even linen does absorb heat and does sweat. That's good. But generally speaking, today we got the wicking, products that are much better. Obviously, we'd also, wearing a hat too that has the ability to do that as well, to cover your head, because your head absorbs a lot of heat. We want to make sure that we don't absorb a lot of heat, because that's,
Right.
So anything we could do as far as the clothing goes. Then we can do, obviously, we can do things like micro breaks, people get out of the heat. If you're working really hard, you can do job rotations.
So what is a micro break? Tell me
Well, I mean, just basically somebody takes, somebody's working for a few minutes in the real extreme heat. They say, hey, you take about a 5-minute breather, go get in the shade, get some water, rehydrate yourself, things like that. Just cool yourself down, because if you're working in the direct heat, I think I read yesterday that they said it adds about almost 15 degrees more of a temperature to your body if you're working in the direct sunlight. So you want to, move in and out and make sure you're not as hot doing that kind of thing. So
and just cooling off or getting in the shade for 5 minutes or so makes a difference.
Absolutely, yeah. Just, adjusting your body back to go, because if you're always hot and you're not taking a break, there's going to be problems.
And you have some sunscreen here. Obviously, that is a good idea.
Sure.
Employers are required to supply some aspects of work safety, but they're not required
No, not necessarily, not for that, no, but it's a good idea. They call it the general duty clause. There is no specific rule that says that OSHA says you have to have X, or that there's any specific standard to it, but they do want to make sure that you have a safe atmosphere for your employees, and that includes making sure that you do have potable water for them to drink. That is always going to be. In fact, everywhere we work, we have to have potable water, so that has to be there. But they also want to make sure that you are giving them, they would make sure you're doing rotation of work, any engineering controls, making sure that they are educated, make sure you have a plan as far as emergency goes. If somebody does get hurt, what do you do? Right. Do you have a plan? Can somebody come and get them? Do you have a night, something like that, especially if you're working in a real remote area?
Absolutely.
So,
Scott Vandenbosch, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it, all the great advice.
Sure.